page 72 of God Speaks, we start today's sessions in Meher Baba's name and love. If the advanced pilgrim is at all able to resist the allurements and treacheries of the dark night of the soul, he enters the mental sphere, or Mano Buhavan, or the Alam Jabarut, by the fifth and final double 7-in-1 achievement, which occurs on the same lines as the fourth. All the folds of the veil are removed together with the relative knots, desires, colors, and impressions. The sixth and seventh doors, as represented by the right and left eyes, are crossed, and the fifth plane of light and love is reached. Those who have safely arrived on the fifth plane are the wali, or the wali Allah, literally meaning friends of God. Their inner sight, or their third eye, is now fully developed. But even though all the seven folds of the veil have disappeared, the veil itself is still there. The pilgrim is therefore not yet face to face with God and cannot see the beloved. Because of their pure love for God, unadulterated by the false ego, the position of these pilgrims on the fifth plane is secure, and there is no possibility of retrogression. Without any harm to themselves, they can and do give consciously or unconsciously immense help to others in the subtle and gross spheres. With rare exceptions, further progress on one's own is now impossible. By the help or grace of a perfect master, one is able to remove the veil entirely and thereby arrive on the sixth plane, the highest plane of the mental sphere, the plane of divine sight, the entrance to divinity, as represented by the forehead, where one is able actually to see God face to face everywhere and in everything. This is known as conviction by sight.
I believe we read that asterisk last.
Yeah, I remember that. Page 73. Those on the gross sphere who believe in the existence of God have their own conviction or yaqeen, based on their pure and simple faith and belief. This conviction is ilmul yaqeen, or intellectual conviction, and is different from the distinctive convictions that follow. 1. Conviction by intuitive perceptions, called yaqeenul yaqeen. 2. Conviction by sight, called ainul yaqeen. 3. Conviction by actual experience, called haqqul yaqeen. Which is supplement 16. Those on the path up through the fifth plane know there is God, with a definite intuitive certainty, or yaqeenul yaqeen. Their conviction is based on sure knowledge. Those on the sixth plane see God everywhere. Theirs is conviction by actual sight. Those on the seventh plane, having become one with God, have conviction by actual experience. The highly advanced pilgrim on the sixth plane is still within the domain of duality. Although face to face with God, the seer and the seen remain separated by a deep, fathomless valley, which can be spanned only by the touch of a perfect master. Whereas the first 5 achievements are possible for man to obtain independently, the actual removal of the veil on the fifth plane is usually accomplished by the grace of a perfect master's guidance. The jump from illusion of the sixth plane to reality on the seventh plane is, however, impossible on one's own and entirely dependent upon the direct touch of a perfect one or a perfect master, which is Sadhguru. On the seventh plane, the plane of infinite knowledge, power, and bliss, the individual merges into God and becomes God, a perfect one for all time and beyond all time. It is then immaterial whether the physical body remains or drops. As a rule, the gross shell falls within a short time after realization. But in some cases, the physical body holds on for a long time. These God-realized ones are known as majzubs or Brahmi Bahuts. Again, only by the direct and personal help of a perfect master does one from among those God-realized one return to the level of ordinary man, regaining consciousness of all the spheres, gross, subtle, and mental, yet retaining at the same time full God consciousness. He is then the man God, the perfect master, Sadhguru or Goto. Page 74. Where there is light, darkness is no more. Where there is knowledge, ignorance is absent. And as the folds, the veil, and the valley of separation are all in the domain of ignorance. A perfect master, who is the son of all knowledge, can in the twinkling of an eye impart God realization to anyone he chooses. Asterisk footnote says, see also Meher Baba, quote, the fabric of the universe, in Beams from Meher Baba on the Spiritual Panorama, pages 13 to 15. And also see Meher Baba, quote, the ways to the path and its states and stages. Listen Humanity, and editor Don Stevens. Anyway, Don Stevens, and there are pages, but let's go back. Okay, so we did say, yeah. God alone is real. And as we are permanently lodged in the divine beloved, we are all one.
Thanks, Mahu. Marian.
All right. This is part B.
I think it's an 8.
Yeah.
What page do you think?
I think it's page 74.
Yeah, it is 74.
Oh, 74.
Oh, no, it's 75.
75. All right. And this is part 8. The beyond state of God, the first urge, and the cycle of evolution and involution of consciousness. The beyond state of God. To begin with the beyond the beginning, there is the original state of the beyond state of God, or Paratpar Parabrahma. This is the original state of God is. In Sufi terms, this state is said to be the state of Wara ul Wara. In this original state of God is, unbounded absolute vacuum prevails. In this absolute vacuum, there is neither any manifestation of the conscious or unconscious state of God, nor is there manifestation of the consciousness or unconsciousness of God. Neither is there the limited I, the divine ego or the universal ego, nor is there the limited I or the individual ego. Neither is there universal mind, nor is there limited mind. Neither is there unbounded energy, nor is there limited energy. Neither is there the universal body, the Mahakarana Sharir, nor is there the limited body. Neither are there universes, nor are there worlds. There is not even consciousness of either the consciousness, Maha Chaitanya, or of the unconsciousness. This state is absolutely the original, unbounded, absolute vacuum state of God. Neither the Nirguna Nirakar nor the Saguna Sakar states of God, where God is and consciousness is not. When it is said God is, it describes a state which prevails beyond the beginning of creation. Page 76. This state of God is also called the original divine sound sleep state of God in the beyond state. The God is state is the state of infinitude. Infinitude, by virtue of being infinite, is everything. That is, everything is the nature of infinitude. Everything, by virtue of being everything, embodies even nothing, or else everything can never mean everything.
Yeah.
This nothing is latent in the everything, but nothing being literally nothing, the very being of being nothing is nothing at all. As this nothing is latent in the everything, the nothingness of the nothing is embedded in the everything as the latency. Thus, in the infinitude of the God is state, all that is latent in the nature of infinity, which is everything, is the nothing. Therefore, anything that is latent in everything is of the nothing. In short, except for the infinity of the infinitude, all things are latent in the God is state of everything. And all that is latent is of the nothing with all its aspects as nothingness. In the God is state, where the nothing is latent, automatically by the nature of nothingness, consciousness also exists as nothing. Accordingly, consciousness in the beyond state of God is ever and ever latent in God, who is by nature the everything, infinite and unlimited and unbounded. Thus, automatically, by his very nature of being the everything, God in the God is state has in him ever and ever infinite power, infinite knowledge, infinite bliss, and all that is infinitely glorious or beautiful. Because God is the everything and the infinite, the opposite of the everything, which is the nothing, must be most finite. Therefore, the nothing is latent in the God is state as the most finite, or in the infinite state of God, which is the everything, there is latent the most finite state of the nothing. It is only natural that when this latent and most finite nothing manifests, it ought to manifest as most finite. But it is a most paradoxical fact that when this most finite nothing manifests, its manifestation gradually expands ad infinitum. The thing that gives infinity to this most finite nothing is God's own latent trio nature of infinite power, infinite knowledge, and infinite bliss, which by virtue of being the nature of God, obviously pervades the infinitude of the God is state latently. Naturally, this infinite trio nature also envelops this most finite nothing when latent in the infinity of the everything. Ohm point. Therefore, when this most finite nothing becomes manifested as nothingness, the manifestation of the most finite nothing closely linked with and stretched forth by the simultaneous projection of the latent, all-pervading, infinite trio nature of God gradually expands ad infinitum and gets apparently manifested as infinite nothingness or the creation. And hence, the universe of nothingness, which is illusory, can be called God's shadow And God being infinite, his shadow is also infinite. In the asterisk at the end of that sentence, the whole creation has come out of nothing. Out of the nothing, two things have emerged: evolution and production. Out of the nothing, 7 states of gas came into being. The 7th evolved state is hydrogen. Out of this 7th gaseous state, evolution and production came into being. Creation can be reconciled with evolution because all is in 7 stages. 7 stages of production, 7 stages of evolution, and 7 stages of involution. So it is said that God created the universe in 7 days. From the nothing, most finite shadow and infinite shadow emerged simultaneously.
Thanks, Marian. Ernie.
When it manifests the nothing, which is most finite and latent in everything, projects out from a most finite point in everything where the nothing is most finite, is embodied. The most finite point from where the nothing projects out as nothingness is called the creation point, or the Om point. This creation point is naturally also in the everything, which means in God, in the beyond state. So the most finite nothing projects as a creation point, as a creation out of the infinite everything through the most finite creation point into the infinity of the infinitude of the God is state. In short, when the most finite nothing gets projected as nothingness through the most finite creation point, which is also in the infinity pervaded by the infinite trio nature of God, the projection of the most finite nothingness, closely linked with and upheld by the all-pervading infinite trio nature of God, gradually expands ad infinitum and manifests apparently as infinite nothingness or as infinite creation. The whim, or lahar, the cause which led the most finite nothing, latent in the infinite everything, to manifest itself as infinite nothingness, is the original cause, called the cause. This cause is just nothing but the whim, or lahar, of God. This original whim, which can also be called the first word uttered by God. Who am I? The infinitude of the God is state made God absolutely independent. And by virtue of being absolutely independent, it is but natural for God to exercise his infinite whim to experience and enjoy his own infinity. To exercise a whim is always the mark of an independent nature, because it is whimsicality that always colors the independent nature. It is the original infinite whim which is responsible for giving cause to the latent all that was of the nothing to manifest as nothingness. But before God exercised his original infinite whim, to make manifest the latent all that was of the nothing, this whim of God was itself latent as the nothing in the everything of the infinitude of absolutely independent God in the God is state. How is it then possible for the latent original infinite whim to surge in God and make manifest itself in all that is latent of the nothing as nothingness? Whim, after all, is a whim, and by its very nature, it is such that why, wherefore, when can find no place in its nature. A whim may come at any moment. It may come now, or after a few months, or after years, and it may not come at all. Similarly, the original infinite whim, after all, is a whim, and two, it is a whim of God in the state of infinitude. This whim may not surge in God at all, and if it surges, either at any moment, or after thousands of years, or after 1,000,000 cycles, it need not be surprising. Page 79. Thus it is that the original infinite whim of God in the state of infinitude once surged, and it surged both spontaneously and all of a sudden in absolutely independent God who is eternally eternal. Hence this whim, which once surged, once began the beginning of all things in creation. In short, this original infinite latent whim of God in the state of infinitude, once it surged in God who is absolutely independent, made itself manifest, and simultaneously with its manifestation, it manifested the latent all that was of the nothing as nothingness. Thus the whim created the nothing. Let us recapitulate how infinite nothing came out of most finite everything. God beyond is infinite everything. Infinite everything may be compared to an infinite, limitless ocean. Therefore, this limitless ocean is infinite everything. Thus, every drop in the ocean is most finite everything. In short, if infinite ocean is infinite everything, then every drop of the ocean is most finite everything. Before the whim surges in the limitless ocean, and before creation is manifested, the creation point, home point, through which the creation has ejected itself in the limitless ocean as infinite everything, because prior to the surging of the whim, perfect tranquility prevailed and pervaded the limitless ocean. There was no question of drops of the ocean, and there was no separateness. There was limitless ocean as infinite everything. At the instant when the whim surged into infinite everything, the creation point, or own point, manifested as most finite everything. Infinite everything was latent in the infinite everything. But
So
when the
that's
whim
infinite nothing, Ernie.
Oh, thank you. Infinite nothing was latent in the infinite everything. But when the whim surged, the infinite nothing got manifested through most finite everything, which is the own point. Thus, through the most finite everything, the infinite nothing is ejected gradually, manifesting itself as expanding ad infinitum. Simultaneously with the projection of the latent nothing and with the manifestation of nothingness, the consciousness which existed as nothing, latent in the infinitude of the God is state, also got projected and manifested itself gradually as the consciousness of God and made God experience himself as God the creator of all the things that projected out of his state of the everything as nothingness. Whereupon, gradually gaining full consciousness, God in the state of creator became entangled in the maze of most finite nothingness, found as infinite, stretched out and upheld through his own infinite trio nature. The paradoxical irony is that the infinity itself of God makes it infinitely difficult for God to escape the false apparent infinity of nothingness, which goes on expanding ad infinitum through the closely linked infinite trio nature of God, which is infinite power, infinite knowledge, and infinite bliss.
Thanks, Ernie. But this entanglement is absolutely necessary in order that God, in the infinitude of the God is state, should gain consciousness fully and completely for himself and of his infinite reality. And in this way, experience consciously his unbounded, unlimited, infinite trio nature of infinite power, infinite knowledge, and infinite bliss. The fundamental fact is that full consciousness, once gained, can never be lost. It remains eternally, regardless of whether that consciousness fully gained is the consciousness of the false nothingness experienced as real, or whether that consciousness is the consciousness of reality itself. Eventually, consciousness does make God realize his own reality after that same consciousness has attained complete maturity. Consciousness fully matured to realize reality only after it is nurtured by the apparent awareness of the false. This awareness of the false as real becomes so intensified during the course of the evolution of consciousness that the consciousness steeped in false awareness makes God aware only of the false, which is experienced by God as the real. That is, God as creator falsely experiences the manifestation of the nothing as real and everything. In order that the latent consciousness of God in the God is state should make it possible for God to realize his own eternal reality, the projection of that latent consciousness in everything, which, when projected outwards, becomes focused on the false infinity of nothingness, should be withdrawn inwardly. By such an inward withdrawal, the focus of the same consciousness becomes centered on the infinity of everything, from which it had projected outwards and given rise to the experience of infinite nothingness, rather than the experience of the infinity of everything. As said before, when the projected consciousness withdraws inwards or undergoes full and complete involution, that nothingness, which was once experienced as reality, automatically vanishes for the consciousness, which is now focused completely on the eternal reality of the infinitude of God. In short, there is no new consciousness to be attained to realize reality, the eternal. It is the same consciousness latent in the everything, which, when it emerges out of the nothing, first gradually evolves, and associating with the nothingness, then experiences the nothingness as real. When the evolution of this consciousness is complete and full, the same consciousness makes God experience the false nothingness, which expands ad infinitum as real and infinite. Again, when the same full and complete consciousness reaches full and complete maturity through its own involution, it realizes infinite reality as the only reality and gives God the experience of his own real and eternal infinite state. God, in his original state of infinitude, is eternally infinite through his infinite, unbounded, and unlimited trio nature of infinite power, infinite knowledge, and infinite bliss. As God eternally is, the only virtual difference between the original state of God and the new states of God that he acquires is that of the consciousness gained progressively through the impressions of the projected nothingness. God, in his original state of God is not conscious of his infinite eternal existence, nor of his own infinite nature, though he exists infinitely and eternally. Due to his own infinite whim, God acquires the consciousness of his reality and realizes his infinite, eternal, unlimited self to experience his unbounded, unlimited, and infinite trio nature. Thus, God, now with his newly acquired state of eternal consciousness, is consciously and eternally aware of his original beyond the beyond state of God is, which is forever and ever unconscious of the infinitude of his own God is state. Therefore, the goal is to realize the eternal and infinite God state consciously. Page 82, as already described, the original state of God is that state of unbounded, absolute vacuum, where God is and consciousness is not. This state is the original divine sound sleep state of God, beyond the beginning of creation. The original infinite whim of God as the cause is responsible for breaking the spell of the original divine sound sleep state of God. And the result, which is creation, is called the effect. Mahu.
Yes. In order to grasp clearly the divine sound sleep state and, okay, I've got to start again. In order to grasp clearly the divine sound sleep state and understand more clearly all that follows immediately after the original infinite whim surges in God, bestirring him from the divine sound sleep, let the divine sound sleep state of God be compared with the sound sleep of man. This sound sleep state of man is literally the same original divine sound sleep state of God. God in the God is state is eternally in the original divine sound sleep state, whereas God in the human state daily experiences alternately the sound sleep state and the awake state. The infinite, impressionless, and formless eternal God experiences himself as finite, limited, inanimate, or animate forms or beings only because of the advent of the first most finite impression of the nothing that manifested as nothingness. At one stage in the evolution of consciousness, the impressions of the nothing impart to God the experiences of the human state. These impressions of the nothing are just the procreation of the original, most finite first impression picked up by the most finite first ray of consciousness in God made manifest simultaneously when the latent original infinite whim surged in God and projected the latent all of the most finite nothing as nothingness. The original most finite impression multiplied and increased simultaneously and concurrently with the evolution of the most finite original trickle of consciousness. The multifarious and varied impressions so formed were experienced by the greater evolution of consciousness through multifarious and varied media of finite or gross forms, because the impressions formed must necessarily be experienced by the consciousness. But for consciousness to experience the impressions, suitable media were absolutely necessary. Page 83. Thus, the evolution of consciousness goes on evolving further and greater consciousness, the conformity with the evolution of gross forms of relatively higher and higher types, in order to experience the impressions gathered in conjunction with the preceding relative lower types of gross media. In short, the most finite first impression of the original infinite whim surging in God gave to the unconscious infinite God the most finite consciousness. Gradually, varied impressions multiplied and increased and gained greater finite consciousness for God, until eventually the evolution of consciousness was complete when the impressions of full consciousness gained identified God with human form. God, having now gained full consciousness in human form, the need no longer persists for additional or higher forms to evolve consciousness, as this consciousness gained is full and complete. During the process of evolution of consciousness, the consciousness, while identifying God consciously with varied finite gross forms, inanimate and animate, was also simultaneously, though unconsciously, on the identifying God with his limited subtle form and his limited mental form. These forms associated with the limited gross form of God in compact and homogeneous unconscious association throughout the process of evolution of consciousness, from the very advent of the first original projection of the latent nothing in everything. It is but natural that, together with the evolution of greater and greater consciousness of God, the evolution of the limited and finite, subtle, and mental forms simultaneously takes place, till in human gross form, the limited, subtle, and mental forms of God are fully developed. Though God has gained full consciousness in human form, and though the limited, subtle, and mental forms are also fully developed in human form, yet the full consciousness so gained is only of the gross, which gives experience only of the gross world. Hence, the fully gained consciousness is not yet conscious of the subtle and mental forms, nor does it consciously experience the subtle and mental worlds. In short, though God in the human state has gained full and complete consciousness, he is still not conscious of his limited energy of the subtle form, nor of his limited mind of the mental form. Much less is he aware or conscious of himself as the one indivisible, eternal, and infinite God with unbounded power and unlimited knowledge. At this stage, God is only conscious of his identity with human form and its varied gross aspects, and experiences in full only the gross world as an ordinary human being of the world in the form of man or woman.
Thank you. Thank you, Mahu. So next week we'll pick up here at the top of page 84.